Welcome back to another episode of Rhodes Map.
I'm getting comfortable with the name. I think you don't feature in the name, though, Alyona.
Me? Well, that's okay. You know, you're the one
to work you in.
who's our guide here. You're our foreign policy guru, and I'm just here to ask the questions.
Well, I'm here to be asked.
I'm Alyona Minkovski.
I'm Ben Rhodes.
Ben Rhodes. So it's been a minute since we have done a Rhodes Map, and that's because there has been a few things happening in the world. I think for us, pretty notably, the U.S. election.
Yes.
And that's what we're here to talk about today, is how presidential transitions work. Because believe it or not, it's not like there's the lame duck period when Biden is still president, and then day one in the White House after inauguration, that's when the Trump administration starts. There's a lot of prep work and stuff that has to happen in between. So we are going to learn all about that, including some of your personal experiences. But I'm going to start. I just want to give a couple fun facts about that. Because right now, if we think about it, there's about 2.5 months to the transition, right? After the election happens, you have November, December, then most of January. It used to be a 4-month period. Do you know why?
I don't.
And this was changed only in 1933 because presidents needed time to travel to Washington.
Oh, yeah, back when the inauguration used to be in March. Yes, I did know that.
Back in the day when, I don't know, you'd ride a horse or something.
Yeah.
They had all your stuff packed in the carriage.
Sure. Yeah,
they were not flying. This is a process that starts at least 6 months in advance, when there's a team that gets set up that starts working on all of this. Transitions can cost upwards, at least most recently, transitions have cost more than $10 million a piece. I think even double that for the last Biden transition. And there are 4,000 political appointments that need to be made. Obviously not all during the transition. These appointments now take longer and longer and longer for people to get approved. But 1,200 of those need Senate confirmation. So it's just a lot to kind of chew on when you think about it.
Yes.
Ben, why don't you start by telling us about the presidential transition? How about the first presidential transition that you were a part of, and everything that was included in there?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It may seem like a long time ago, but it's worth reflecting back on because it's probably the last normal transition we've had. And that was in 2008 after Barack Obama was elected. George W. Bush was very good in that transition and making it as easy as possible for us. But just to build on what you were saying, Alyona, in the summer, a transition team is appointed. Then after the election, it really expands. And you get office space through the GSA, that's the General Services Administration. The people kind of run the nuts and bolts of the federal government. You hire a bunch of people who work on the transition. I was an employee of the presidential transition in 2008. Then there are people that are assigned to each agency, right? So there's a State Department transition team, and there's a Defense Department transition team. And what they're doing is building the list of people that are going to be hired. And so going through those thousands of political appointees and filling different roles. If they need to get confirmed, preparing for confirmations. There's FBI background checks that are done of all those appointees, so those are being worked through at the same time. But then also you start to begin to shadow the people you're succeeding. And so, I remember getting intelligence briefings. I remember visiting the NSC and, kind of the person that you're succeeding. You meet with them and you kind of hear from them what's going on. So it's meant to feel like the passing of a baton, literally, like you're running full speed. I remember when during that 2008 transition, there was a war in Gaza. There's one president at a time normally. So, Bush was briefing us on what was happening in this war in Gaza that we were going to inherit. And so it's meant to, both hire people, but also get your people up to speed, get them ready for confirmation hearings if they need that, and basically be ready to walk in the door on January 20th, kind of knowing what you're stepping into instead of it being cold.
I have some some dumb practical questions too, which is I think more in relation to what happens in on a foreign policy front, right? Because aside from needing to prepare your team and get them all up to speed here domestically, you also then, as the president, are going to be in charge of foreign policy. You and your team, you're going to be meeting with foreign leaders. How do people know who to call? Does the White House phone number ever change?
Well, so first of all, I mean, one of the most dramatic things that happens, I remember talking to Obama about this at the time, is the incoming president, he's getting read into every covert operation, the United States has. He's sitting down with the CIA. He's getting, trained on how to manage the nuclear codes. I mean, there's some pretty heavy shit that happens during a transition. So let's not lose sight of that. But also what's interesting, and we'll compare this to what's happening now, you are told, I remember being told, don't have kind of freelance contacts with foreign governments, because a lot of foreign governments are trying to reach out to you. They want to get to know the incoming team. We were told to kind of route all that through the transition so that these requests, you might have some meetings, but they didn't want everybody freelancing. They wanted this to be done through an established process. The transition kind of compiles those requests. They consult with the outgoing administration that is still in charge of foreign policy. That's how it's supposed to work,
I
let's
see.
just say. As early as 2016, that was not happening because the Trump people were just doing their own thing.
They were doing whatever they want.
Yeah.
I feel like there are always, conspiracy theories that whittle find their way into these things, which is, you mentioned, like the president has to learn about the nuclear codes. What about the aliens?
Yeah, there was no alien briefing. They keep that information from you, I guess.
I don't believe it. You're lying.
Yeah, so unfortunately, you don't learn who killed Kennedy. You don't learn about Area whatever in New Mexico.
Area 51.
Area 51. But yeah, I mean, just on the foreign government point, this is when we knew that things were different with Trump. A few days after the election, for instance, he did a call with the president of Taiwan without telling us. It was set up by like a lobbyist. This was hugely consequential.
This was in 2016.
2016.
Yeah.
U.S. president-elects don't normally, talk directly to the Taiwanese president because the Chinese lose their mind. So we were managing that. You had Mike Flynn. For those old enough to remember the first Trump administration, he was apparently in touch with like the Russian ambassador, which was at the same time that we were sanctioning the Russians over election interference. You had every foreign government that could get in the door going to Trump Tower, just kind of building their own relationships with Trump and his family and his associates. So even in 2016 too, Alyona, they were not interested in a lot of the services we had to provide, right? My successor refused to meet me, because I was kind of PNG. So this was already starting to change in 2016.
It's fascinating to me, though, because if you think about it, like, okay, the president might be a new figure on the foreign policy stage, but a lot of the time, the staffers, and again, Trump is the exception to so much of this, but there are people who are lifetime government people, right, who have maybe worked in foreign policy for a long time, who maybe already have these relationships established. And so it's probably interesting that they have to hold back until they're officially were there, at least back in your day.
Yeah, those are the days of norms. So I don't think that's happening anymore. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about all the norm breaking
Yeah.
That's happening right now, because as you mentioned, it started already in 2016, the first time that Trump came into office. And it's continuing now. There have been a couple stories about this. I just want to mention a few things that are happening. So first of all, Politico had a story just a couple days ago that Trump's advisors have not yet begun meeting with federal agencies. And this is all part of something called the agency review process, where you have people meet. And there's a lot to get up to speed on, right?
Yeah.
I mean, some of these agencies have millions of people that work for them. You're talking about huge budgets, an insane amount of personnel, and they're just kind of taking their sweet time, which in this article, they also had a lot of experts saying that, it brings up a lot of kind of serious questions. A, that a lot of Trump's nominees have never run a federal agency or any organization that size before. That B, when it comes to issues of national security or maybe public health, like if there's another COVID or some type of similar pandemic, you're not going to have all the time in the world to sit there and get up to speed. Like, you need to start this process right now. So I don't know. Does it surprise you? I guess what is, I'm going to go through some of the other things they're doing, but what is the argument for waiting?
Well, what's interesting about this transition is that it can seem disorganized, but it's actually far more organized in 2016. In 2016, when the Obama White House met with the Trump transition team, which was headed by Chris Christie, the day after the election, they basically didn't have any of these plans because they had not expected Trump to win. Then Trump fired all those people, put a whole new team in place under Jared Kushner, and he was hiring people that he'd never met before, for key jobs, like Jim Mattis at the Pentagon. This time around, it's notable to me that they seem to have, maybe because of Project 2025, maybe just because they know more people, they started appointing people right away. Mm-hmm. So that shows you that they have a plan in terms of wanting to accelerate getting people nominated for things. On the other hand, they're doing this transition kind of totally outside the boundaries of how it's normally done. So they're raising private money for it instead of it being kind of through the GSA. They're not doing FBI background checks of their nominees.
It's run through private security firms. Don't worry, Ben.
I think that explains how you get a Hegseth through without knowing about sexual assault and rape allegations and heavy drinking and all the rest of it. I mean, I'll just own up to something here. Like, my security clearance is delayed because I was honest about my past drug use on my form, so they then had to go do a background check, and thankfully it came through ultimately. But they're trying to kind of go it alone. They don't. Maybe it's because they don't trust the FBI. They don't trust the so-called deep state. But they're not doing the background checks. They're not doing the agency reviews. It's like they're not. It's almost like they're uninterested in the views of the outgoing Biden administration. I mean, I've heard ad hoc. Some of the people, are talking to the people they're succeeding. Right, like the Jake Sullivan has said he's talked to Waltz, the guy who's going to succeed him as national security advisor. But they don't really seem that interested in the intake of information. It feels much more like a hostile takeover. I mean, you've got Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy threatening to fire, large swaths of the government, So this is a hostile takeover of the federal government, not a handoff of a baton.
Yeah, and I understand that if your entire ethos is that the government is, bloated and wasting money and corrupt.
In a corrupt deep state.
Yeah, and you're in a corrupt deep state, then you're coming in to clean house. But do you agree that there are kind of national security concerns that arise if people are not prepared or sharing information?
There definitely are. I mean, there's a few. The first is just, if you don't do any of these background checks, look, the background checks are a pain in the ass. I didn't like having to describe,
this one time when I smoked pot in college.
But, you want to know, particularly when you're all these unusual people like Tulsi Gabbard or Pete Hegseth or whomever, do they have foreign associations that could be questionable? Do they have a history of kind of behavioral problems that those aren't just because you want to vet the character, say, of a guy like Hegseth who's going to be in charge of the Pentagon, but also they could be blackmailed, based on something in their background. That's something that people are looking at. It's funny to me, Alyona, one of the questions that is always asked on the process is, have you ever tried to participate in the overthrow of the U.S. government, which I always thought was a bit of a dramatic question. Well, actually, now a bunch of these people, because of January 6th, wouldn't pass that threshold. So one is just the vetting of people, and that's important. Another is, they need to know what's going on in Syria, what's going on in the Middle East, what's going on in Ukraine. Like, for the sake of national security, you would want the incoming team to kind of have the benefit of, here's the state of play in these negotiations, or here's the state of play in this war. And so if they're not doing that, they're just not preparing themselves for what they're going to be, taking on January 20th. That's a second concern. I think a third concern is when you do have this, very uncertain process where Trump, and we can talk about this, is kind of running a parallel foreign policy already, doing negotiations, threatening tariffs, all these leaders going to see him. The rest of the world, who's the president, right? And we've already seen a lot of shit is going on. Syria is overthrown, the Assad regime. We had martial law in South Korea. We've obviously got ongoing wars in Ukraine, and so it's this kind of volatile time. Things might feel a little bumpier right now because I think a lot of people around the world are thinking. I mean, it would not surprise me if one of the things that the South Korean president was thinking is, well, this is a good time for me to try this martial law thing out. Biden's a lame duck. Trump's not in yet. So you also worry about that dynamic.
Yeah. Well, also, we've never had a president come back for a second term after skipping a term. So that throws a whole different dynamic into the mix because Trump already had relationships with some of these leaders, but not all of them. And he just gets to invite everyone to Mar-a-Lago.
Yes. Yeah.
Some of the other things that are happening that you mentioned, I mean, you talk about the question about whether or not you've ever been involved in trying to overthrow the U.S. government. There was an article in the New York Times that said some people are being asked as they apply for jobs in the government, especially those going into intelligence or jobs at the Pentagon. They're being asked loyalty test questions when it comes to Trump, essentially asking who you supported, which candidate you supported in the last election, what your thoughts are on January 6th, what your thoughts are on the 2016 election, and who won. So what does that tell you?
I mean, that tells me that Trump is not hiring people to work for the U.S. government. He's hiring people to work for his own interests. And, that may not seem like a big deal to people, but it is because at the end of the day, we're temporary employees. I was there for as long as you could possibly be there, 8 years, day one of Obama to the last day, and then I was gone. I mean, there's a U.S. government that has to operate independently from the interests of the President of the United States, certainly their political interests. The vast majority of the government workforce is not political. There are people who will be there at the beginning and, unless Elon Musk fires them, will be there at the end. But even the people who are being hired, they're being hired for very apolitical roles. If you're the, assistant secretary of state for X region, or you're at the Pentagon running, the procurement for a certain military service, I want those people to be going to work thinking about, what's the best thing for the U.S. Navy, or, how can I best advance U.S. interests in this part of the world, not, how do I express my undying loyalty to Donald Trump? And that gets particularly complicated if you're talking about people with real power, like intelligence agencies that can do covert operations, the FBI that has the power of investigation. Yes, it's a new dynamic that those people are basically... I was, obviously I'd worked on the Obama campaign, but most of the people who were hired had not worked on the Obama campaign. And they're hired for their expertise in a field, not because, they were going to crawl through broken glass for Barack Obama. It's from the beginning setting a tone that all of these agencies are going to be politicized. The truth itself may be subordinate to Trump's version of the truth or his political interests. And that very powerful positions are going to be filled with people who are chosen more for their loyalty to Trump than for anything else. I never had to sign a loyalty oath or answer a question like that, or sign an NDA like these people are signing.
We'll just call that Barack Obama's loss right now.
Well, yeah. I thought about this a lot. Sure, I would have liked to have a, it's times a more responsive bureaucracy. But, there's trying to adjust decision-making control versus populating the entire government with a bunch of loyalists, and that's worrying. No,
it's very worrying, and everything you bring up, of course, is completely valid. I just want to touch on the private fundraising issue that you brought up too, which is it makes sense that the government and taxpayers would pay for the presidential transition because it's in all of our interests for something like this to go smoothly, for the correct information to be passed on. What is in the interest of privately fundraising for this process? Why would a president and his team do that?
Well, the reason that I can think to do it mainly have to do with corruption, which I'll come back to. I guess, I don't know. It was easy to work with GSA. We had an office space in downtown D.C. There was a government office space. We had government email addresses, including the ability to look at classified information, all these things that you'd want in a transition. I guess the Trump people want greater flexibility. They want to not play by the government rules on things like security clearances, maybe. But the risk is, appointments can be very valuable, because appointments, you're talking about people that are running agencies that regulate certain industries, or you're talking about people that are going to be in charge of making decisions about government contracts. Let's just take, for example, like an Elon Musk. I don't know if he's donating to transition, so this is a hypothetical. But, if Elon Musk were to write a huge check to the transition, well, I'm sure he's making some recommendations about appointments. We know he has. He said himself, he's down in Mar-a-Lago advising Trump. Well, I'm sure Elon Musk has an interest in the appointment of the people who are going to be in charge of Pentagon contracts for companies like SpaceX, or domestic tax credits that could apply to Tesla, and federal communications regulators who will be overseeing X. And so if this is for, literally pay to play, people donating to the transition, you have to think will want the people that regulate their companies to be friendly, and so you can see huge potential for corruption with this kind of fundraising.
So lovely. Makes me feel all of this makes me feel so good about our government and where things are going. Well, I think that, I feel like that's a pretty good overview of presidential transitions and what we should have expected and, and what's coming next. My last kind of question about that is, on a political level, was there ever tension? You guys were taking over for the Bush administration. Barack Obama certainly didn't hold any punches on the campaign trail when it came to criticizing the Bush administration for what they did. Things have only gotten more partisan and divisive now since those years. But like, was there ever weird tension between you and the other people?
I thought there'd be more, but like the Bush people, to go way, way back, probably before most of our viewers remember, the Clinton to Bush transition was weird because there was Bush v. Gore and it dragged on. But then there were these kind of dumb DC stories like the Clinton people removed the W's from keyboards and stuff. With kind of juvenile stuff. But for that reason, I think Bush kind of sent this directive, like, we're going to do the best transition possible. And they really did. I mean, we beaten the shit out of Bush that whole campaign. But I remember I was a speechwriter at the time, me and John Favreau and the Obama speechwriters, the outgoing head of speechwriting for Bush, this guy named Mark Thiessen, who people may know now is like a pretty bomb-throwing right-wing columnist for the Washington Post. But he invited us to the West Wing. He gave us a tour. He showed us the Oval Office. He was very nice. What's funny about that is he was very nice to us in the transition. All the Bush people were. And then I think a week into the Obama administration, he wrote his first column just eviscerating Barack Obama for the Washington Post and sent us all the column. And we're like, thanks, I guess, for sharing this. So, it was still like we disagreed, but it didn't interfere with the transition process itself. In 2016, it was a little different because I was at the NSC. Mike Flynn was the incoming national security advisor, and not a warm and fuzzy guy. He met with Susan Rice, but let's just say they weren't that interested in the materials we were sharing. There were some strange questions.
They're like, don't worry, we already have our own.
Well, yeah, exactly. And he's like, do we share the information about Russia with these guys? And like I said, they didn't want to meet with me because I was this kind of Fox News. I mean, actually, I was being replaced by a Fox News host, Monica Crowley, at the time.
Oh, another one?
So it was weird. And the reality is, like, 3 times in a row, that the 2016 transition, I think we did everything by the book in the Obama administration, but the Trump people were kind of chaotic. 2020, you had January 6th in the middle of that transition, so that was hardly normal. This one, we've talked about, nothing normal about it. So we have not really had a normal transition of power in this country since 2008. I mean, it's really kind of crazy to think about. And just shows you how much Trump has kind of disrupted these kind of more routine functions of how government works.
And nothing will ever be the same again.
Probably not. Probably not. Yeah.
It feels dark to say, but it's hard to imagine how you just walk back everything that has transpired. Okay, I'm going to do one thing here at the end. I always like to play a game with you.
Oh, yeah.
You might hate me for this one and make me take it out of the video.
Let's see. We'll see.
But I'm going to do a fuck, kill, or marry with some of Trump's appointees.
Oh, God. Wait, would I be doing this?
Well, yes, you have to choose
Those are my 3 choices?
The F, kill, or marry. But I'm going to give you the 3 choices.
All 3 of those could get me in massive trouble.
No, your choices are RFK, Tulsi Gabbard, and Kash Patel.
I have to do one of those things with all 3 of those people?
Have you ever played Fuck, Kill, or Marry before?
I mean, not in a long time, and not and not as it relates to the
you
incoming
choose
FBI
one
director.
goes in each category. So you choose one person to kill off, one person you'd have to marry, one person you would, engage in relations with briefly.
Okay.
Or not briefly.
I can't, should I'm very conflicted about this,
Okay.
No. I'm going to come up with other things I'd like to do with these people. How about that,
Okay. Okay. You always do this with my games. You're like, here's my alternative version.
I need is like Ben Rhodes wants to marry Tulsi Gabbard, or engage in relations with her.
This is why I said you might make me completely take this out of the video, which is understandable.
I guess with RFK, I would, to create new categories, a non-illegal exotic meal together. It seems like he's got a lot of experience. I'm always open to trying new animals. Again, within the boundaries of the law and not necessarily roadkill or whales on the beach.
Okay.
But I think we could do that together, and that could be fun. Kash Patel, I've already had the pleasure of being questioned at a House Intelligence Committee hearing by him. Perhaps we could co-author a children's book together. I've always kind of wanted to write a children's book, and he's got this experience writing about King Donald and the Wizard Cash, right? So maybe we could write a sequel to that together.
Old Man Biden, something like that.
And Tulsi Gabbard, she's clearly an adventurous traveler, as am I. Having gone to Syria to meet with Bashar al-Assad, I mean, maybe we could pick another exotic location to go together.
I'm getting real, like, I would bang Tulsi Gabbard vibes out of that answer, but okay.
I mean,
out of the three, it's an obvious.
I am a cis het guy, and you're only really giving me one option, therefore, viable option in that category. But I'm not going to say it in any way that could be played back to me by the security guards at the Trump gulag. That I may find myself at in a couple of years. I don't want to give them any additional ammunition.
Well, you're a really good sport, and I appreciate you for playing along. That's it for this episode of Rhodes Map. This is why it has your name on it and not mine.
Yeah, no, I'm glad.
That's to circle all the way back to that.
I'm glad you did that. Yeah, it's good for everybody.
All right, thanks, guys, and don't forget to send us your ideas for what other topics you want new Rhodes Map episodes on. Thanks, Ben. And subscribe.
And subscribe
to Pod Save the World on YouTube.
Yeah.